At IDOS, the German Institute of Development and Sustainability. And I'm delighted today also to join as a new co-speaker for the Bonn Water Network, alongside Diego Yara from IUCN. I think, we both of us have started as co-speakers beginning of this year. So before we get started with today's discussion, let me take a few minutes briefly to introduce the Bonn Water Network, the organization which is co-hosting this session. So who we are, the Bonn Water Network was founded in 2020. It's exactly almost 6 years now, but it's based on the pre-existing collaboration among organizations that had long been working together here in Bonn and conducting Bonn Water lectures and through more informal collaboration. So what makes Bonn Water Network distinctive from the outset is its combination. All the organizations have their local roots in Bonn, which is one of the world's most important hubs for sustainable development, and paired with the global outreach of different organizations. So the membership of the network truly reflects that ambition. We bring together research institutes, Bonn University Research Institutes, and three UN institutions and UN affiliated bodies, two think tanks, and also two NGOs. The Bonn International Center for Conflict Studies, the Bonn University is represented with the Institute of Geography, holding the UNESCO Chair in Human Water Systems, Center for Development Research, Institute for Hygiene and Public Health, and of course the German Institute of Development and Sustainability, and IUCN Environmental Law Center, and the three UN institutions, the UNCCD, the United Nations University, United Nations Institute for Environmental Health Security, and the UN GWOPA, the Global Water Operators Partnership. So in addition, we have our partners who are not based in Bonn. For example, the Berlin-based Water Integrity Network and the International Center for Water Resource and Global Change, which is based in Koblenz, which are also partners of Bonn Water Network. So this broad coalition, spanning research, practice, and policy, positions the network uniquely in addressing the water challenges through its diverse and transdisciplinary nature. So what we do is basically the network bundles the expertise in research, training, and practice to help implement sustainable and inclusive water solutions and to advance the water-related sustainable development goals. So we draw on natural sciences, as you have seen, there are natural science departments, engineering, and social sciences, but also reflecting the transdisciplinary nature, we also bring in applied knowledge that comes from the NGOs, the civil society organizations that are involved, and through direct engagement with communities and stakeholders. So the network is worldwide. I mean, the network operates worldwide across different continents, across different countries in Asia, Africa, Latin America, but also right here in Europe and in the Bonn region. Our activities take many forms through research publications, policy advice, training programs for both academics and policymakers, and organizing international debates like these ones that are deliberately practical and results oriented, and which promotes exchange of knowledge, information. So it's been 6 years, and we have our own learnings, and we realize that this width of expertise is our strength, and it's enriching, and it promotes the cross-disciplinary conversations and consistently producing better insights. And together, what we have realized is that we have far greater outreach and capacity to share problems and solutions than each of us can individually can. Now, going forward, we want to deepen this mutual learning between Germany and different stakeholders in Germany, and also our partners in the Global South. And we very much at the network look forward to contributing, and also as speakers, me and Diego. So now coming to today's event, why we are here, today's debate against the current, how water access affects women and men differently and how to change it, speaks directly to the Bonn Water Network's mission, and marking the World Water Day this year under the UN campaign theme, Where Water Flows, Equality Grows. So we have four excellent panelists joining us and a rich discussion ahead. So without much ado, I'll just hand over to Annabelle Houdret from IDOS, my colleague, who will moderate today's discussion. Annabelle, the floor is yours. You can introduce the speakers. Thank you. And I
Thank you so
will keep
much.
monitoring just one last announcement. So please post your questions or comments in the chat. So I'll keep an eye on them and then pass it on to Annabelle, who will moderate the discussion. Yeah. And not in the Q&A, just in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the nice introduction, Srini. Welcome, everybody, and thanks for being with us here today from so many different countries. I hope you all had a wonderful, nice World Water Day last Sunday, which is always an opportunity to think about the many different ways in which water matters in our daily lives. And maybe it was also an occasion to reflect on how water affects men and women differently, because this year the UN focuses on water and gender, because, quote unquote, where water flows, equality supposedly grows. As my dear colleague Anindita, which is also on the panel today, and I described in the column we published last week, unfortunately, infrastructure for water flows is often not enough for equality to grow. It's easy to treat water as a technical service of pipes and bills, but water is also political and economic power, and that power is still distributed unequally. So it's about who decides, who benefits, and who is left behind. And these are the questions I'm very happy to explore today with my great panel of experts, which I'll be happy to introduce one by one. So we will have two rounds of questions which all panelists will answer. And then we open the floor to your questions, which, as Rini rightly said, you can post in the chat. Thank you. So we start with the first question, which is, how does water access affect men and women differently? Does it make a difference if you're a man or a woman working in an urban or a region area in this country or that country? And we go through that with all our panelists from different backgrounds. So first, over to you, Abby. Abigail Erikson, she's a licensed clinical social worker and a dedicated leader in advancing the rights and well-being of women and girls since over 25 years. She's a strong advocate for ending violence against women and girls and has served as the chief of the UN Trust Fund to End Violence Against Women and Girls since 2023 and is now the acting head of the UN Women Bonn office since August last year. A very warm welcome to Bonn again and to the water community here. Abby, the floor is yours to share your experiences.
Thank you so much, Annabelle. And indeed, you can't see, but I'm looking out at the Rhine River behind me. So I am here in Bonn. It's lovely to be here. Thank you so much to the Bonn Water Network and, of course, my fellow panelists and everyone who's joining us today. As you noted, I'm coming sort of with two hats. So I'm speaking, broadly as UN Women, but also want to talk a bit about the organizations that we support at the UN Trust Fund to End Violence Against Women and Girls. But I also really want to acknowledge that all of you who are speaking, who organize this, and many of you on the call, and my colleagues across the UN system, who are really, working every single day on these issues around environment and water. I work every day on ending gender-based violence. They come together, but just want to acknowledge everyone. It's funny because I always say, well, gender equality is the heart of our shared future. But of course, for this audience, so isn't water. And I think you've already laid it out that, we all know from our personal lives and from the work that we do how essential water is. And how important safe water and sanitation is and how much it's out of reach for so many people around the world. And you already mentioned Annabelle, and I haven't read the article yet, but this does not affect men and women the same, and it doesn't affect girls and boys the same. The latest data that UN Women has published along with UN DESA shows that more than 1 billion women, so that's over a quarter of women across the globe, still lack access to safely managed drinking water, and 380 million women and girls live in areas of high or critical water stress. And that's really projected only to grow if we don't take urgent action in the coming decades. So in many ways, I'm happy to hear that that's the theme for this year. Of course, I know that, but I think also part of that is because we see very much that the global water crisis is also a gender equality crisis. like so many facets of our life, it's shaped by gendered social norms and rules and economic inequalities and power relationships. And so that really means like, how do those gender and social norms affect what's happening in the household, what's negotiated, who collects water, who depends on it for their livelihoods, who's most exposed potentially to exploitation and abuse when water and food and other things become scarce or unsafe. And I think, the other panelists will also speak to this. I've seen this, frankly, in my own community where I grew up in very rural Maine, a state in the United States, but also working in remote refugee camps along the Thai-Burma border, the Pacific and East Africa, that in so many rural settings and urban settings, women and girls really carry a lot of the responsibility for household water collection. And that means leaving the house early, traveling long distances to get water. Of course, that also reduces their own time for education or economic or participation in community life. And we know that there's also a correlation where there's a heightened risk of exploitation and abuse. I was shocked actually to learn preparing for this that women and girls in the 53 countries where we have data spend a collective 250 million hours each day, like every single day in 53 countries collecting water, which is more than 3 times that of men and boys. I just wanted to speak to a couple of examples because at the UN Trust Fund to End Violence Against Women and Girls, our whole mandate is the prevention of gender-based violence. And interestingly enough, maybe for some of you, some of that is very much linked to the prevention of violence as it relates to safe and equitable access to water, safe and equitable access to food. So for example, in South Sudan, a women's rights organization that we support who knows these challenges very well, where of course women are responsible for the household water collection, but also adolescent girls, right? They're pulled out of school to now their main job, oftentimes right at the end of primary school, is to now support the household in household survival, and part of that is accessing water. And so this organization is not only working to prevent those risks, but of course, what we would all want and hope to see, also really helping to hopefully get these girls to stay in school. We all know the trajectory, the global data of when a girl is pulled out of school after primary, what happens to her overall future opportunities. And I just wanted to highlight a couple of other points, but of course, as you all know, you're experts in this agriculture. I mean, that's most of the freshwater use, and that's where women farmers play a huge role and oftentimes don't have the same access to land, irrigation, and water rights. I've worked and lived in many countries where women literally cannot own land. And so we know that obviously makes them very vulnerable. And if indeed this is their livelihood and there's been a low crop yield, then income is going to go down, and that's going to increase food insecurity and poverty. So this is also why the UN Trust Fund supports organizations, one in Bangladesh, who really work specifically on women's control over land and water resources, and also to prevent community disputes by supporting mediation around these different things. Finally, I just wanted to highlight, because I spent prior to coming to Bonn, really the last 8 years of my life living and working in Fiji and the Pacific. And I just really directly experienced and saw how concretely climate change is further intensifying the gendered impacts of water insecurity. And we know how many people and women and girls, 1.5 billion women and girls living in countries that have a high exposure to drought or other aspects of climate emergencies. And really how linked that water scarcity is to displacement, to the food insecurity, and then of course that's leading into overall increased protection risks. So I think these challenges are not new. We'll move on to the other speakers, but I think that at the moment we've got to get very, very concrete and real about how we bring together the commitments around, equitable and safe access to water and the infrastructure we need with the commitments that we've made globally around the Beijing Declaration Platform for Action for Gender Equality, and really ensure that we're moving forward in the most, gender equal way for a great future for all of us. Over. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abby, also for bringing us the broader picture and this global data. Over to Ivan now. Ivan Zupan is heading the Water Integrity Network's country programs in Kenya, Mexico, Bangladesh, and Uganda, and is very experienced in fighting water integrity and good governance. He has more than 10 years of working experience in the anti-corruption sector with previous engagements with Transparency International and the International Anti-Corruption Academy. Thank you so much. Water Integrity Network is also a member of our network, and I really appreciate the work you're doing, which is not often enough talk about, I think, corruption in the water sector. Over to you, Ivan, to share experiences from these countries.
Thanks, Annabelle. Thanks for the invite, and I couldn't agree more that there should be more space and opportunity to discuss this topic. So gender and more broadly social inclusion, it's important for WIN. We are a global network or a global NGO. We work exclusively on water and sanitation integrity. And gender is an important part of it. There's the anti-corruption part, but there's also participation. It's also transparency. So I want to go a little bit in a different direction than the one that Abigail has taken. I want to highlight 3 areas that I believe are important to help us unpack a little bit how the difference in genders impacts then water services WASH, let's say. I'm going to talk about transparency failures, participation failures, and then go into the direction of corruption perception and impact. If we begin with transparency failures, what we've seen is women are invisible in water data. It means budgeting, planning, the disaggregation by gender, it's the exception. So the specific needs, burdens of women, they never drive resource allocation. As a result, these budgeting processes, they exclude the realities of women. They direct more spending and budget towards productive agriculture users over domestic access. And finally, access to information on decision making from women remains very low across the board. Secondly, participation. Participation, let's say in the broader water governance, say bubble or environment, it's procedural. Women's inclusion is procedural. It's not substantive. Very regularly you see seats without power, maybe to check some KPIs on donors, but there are good exceptions, but let's say it's still too little. And when women get a seat, for example, at water committees, there are also different cultural and norm dynamics that come into play. Male-dominated networks means that the final decision-making is still within their hands. And finally, I want to share some of our work in relation to corruption and gender, the nexus. So first of all, women, they encounter corruption differently than men. They're more exposed to bribery, for example, because of their household level utility interactions. That's a fact. The second one is gender-based violence has influence, clearly, as Abigail says, to access. This has been for a long time. It's also quite studied. At the same time, we should not forget, we should also be addressing sexual corruption. What I mean by that is it's another form of corruption where instead of money, there's sex being offered for as a currency of a bribe. Yeah, it's a fact. So sex for water is not just a very gross slogan. It is a reality. It happens in situations where there's water access or wash access is limited or is controlled, for example, by meter readers, repair workers, water truck operators, or contractors, and so on and so forth. And we've done some, I would say, very important work in this regard. Our starting point is we knew that in service delivery there is sexual corruption. It was documented, for example, in health or education. We wanted to see how affected the wash sector is. We've done work in Uganda, in Kenya, Bangladesh as well. What we have found out is we've done research surveys in peri-urban and informal settlements. So we went into areas where, let's say, there's women are more affected, let's say, by unstable service delivery. What we have observed is between 15 and 20% of respondents, they have either first-hand experienced sexual corruption or they know someone who has suffered it. So it's a lot, if you think, and we think we are, at the tip of the iceberg, because it's also hard to build trust in these surveys. There's a lot of taboo, there's a lot of stigma around it. So we believe that the real figure could be higher. I'll wrap up by saying where we have observed that sexual corruption thrives the most. It's among situation of extreme poverty. Imagine you're not having money to afford official fees or bribes, then women can be coerced into sexual exchange instead as a form of payment. Situation of water insecurity, situations where you have informal water resources, so gatekeepers come in the way. So this makes it all more complex. Low literacy and awareness. So if you don't have people that know about their rights or what are some of the reporting mechanisms, that's also catastrophic. And finally, I mentioned already gender and social norms. So women have this expectation to remain silent about sexual abuse, so leads to severe underreporting. I think I'm going to stop for now. I'll gladly pick it up later during the conversation.
Thank you so much, Ivan, for making us understand this difficult topic a bit better. And now we travel to Morocco. Welcome, Hind Ftouhi. Dr. Hind Ftouhi is an agronomist and rural sociologist. She is currently a lecturer and researcher at the Institut National d'Aménagement et d'Urbanisme in Rabat, and her research focuses on the roles of rural youth and agrarian and territorial transformations in Morocco, gender dynamics, and the governance of natural resources, particularly water, land, and rural areas. Hind, how do you experience that water affects men and women differently? You're still muted.
Sorry. So I was saying that first of all, I would like to thank you for the invitation, and I am very happy to be part of this discussion. So I think the colleagues had already highlighted many important points. So in my answer, I will draw on several years of research that have been conducted with my colleagues in rural Morocco, and especially in semi-arid oasis regions in Morocco, where water has always been scarce. And so I will approach this question from the perspective of water scarcity and how it shapes access to water and unequal effects on men, but also in women. In fact, over the past decade, we've observed a significant decline in both the availability but also the quality of water. And this is linked not only to climate change but also to broader transformations such as agricultural policies oriented toward intensification and export. But also it's linked to the development of tourism, for example, which increases pressure on water resources. So these changes are, how I can say it, deeply affecting local communities. And what we see from our fieldwork, or what we continue to see, is that the water scarcity does not affect everyone in the same way. And gender is a key dimension here in this way that the water scarcity and the water access to water is affecting the different members of the community from different perspective or from different with different dimensions, is if I could say that. And if we look more specifically at women, water scarcity directly affects a wide range of their daily activities. For example, in these oases in the southeast of Morocco, in the semi-arid region, women are actively involved in agricultural work, like cutting alfalfa for livestock, for example, harvesting cereals, collecting and preserving dates, but also taking care of animals. And they are also involved in the processing or the transformation activities of these agricultural products, such as, for example, transforming vegetables, preserving dates, and so on. And of course, in a range of domestic tasks that depend on water, like washing, cooking, meeting everyday household needs, and taking care of the different members of the family. And what we observe in that is that the decline in water availability with, for example, the drying of wells, the reduced water release from the dam, and also the increasing salinity of the available water is transforming all these activities. And I will try to explain how this is actually affecting or transforming these activities. So, concretely, agriculture production has decreased and many plots have been partially or completely abandoned, especially for households that do not have the means, for example, to access deeper water or to access other alternative water sources. As a result, women's activities in these plots in the agriculture dimension or the sector have been reduced or in some cases have even stopped. So this means that the spaces where women used to be active are becoming less central in their daily activities or in their daily lives. At the same time, these activities that depend on agricultural production, such as the transformation, the processing, have been also affected. So water scarcity does not only increase women's workload, it can also lead to a reduce or even a loss of their economic and productive roles among their communities. And there is also another important dimension is that the water scarcity affects also the social relations between women, because in many rural contexts in Morocco, but also in other countries, activities linked to water were also moments of gathering, exchange, but also conviviality among these women. So with the decline in water availability, but also quality, these shared spaces and interactions are being reduced or are disappearing. So beyond the economic and productive rules, water scarcity also reshape social ties and everyday forms of sociability among these women. And finally, the ability to cope also with the water scarcity is very uneven. Access to alternative water sources or technical solutions often depends on financial means and social position, and these tend to be more accessible to men rather than women. And one final point that I want to highlight before ending my answer, it's also important to say that these differences are not only about gender. They are also shaped by social hierarchies within households, but also within communities such as age, marital status, socio-economical status, and access to resources among men and women, but also among young people, elder people, poor household and rich household, who belong to which class or strata of the society, and so on. So I think I will end my answer here. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Hind, for these very concrete examples. It makes us easier to travel to the oasis with you. Thank you. Now over to my dear colleague Anindita, who is Dr. Anindita Sarkar, is professor in the Department of Geography at Miranda House, University of Delhi, but fortunately also a senior researcher at the Department of Ecology and Natural Resource Management at the Center for Development Research at the University of Bonn. Anindita, the floor is yours.
First of all, thank you, Annabelle, for inviting me to this discussion. And this topic has been very close to my heart. I've been researching on this for more than 2 decades now. And this is a very important question about how water access affects men and women differently. Because we often think water as a basic service, but in reality, on the ground, we see that it actually reveals who has the resource or money or who has time, who has safety, and who has power. I'll give you some examples from my research to make this point that I see in several field studies, that the key point is that water access is not just gendered, it is also intersectional. Now that we have heard a lot from the colleagues already, so I will add a different aspect of this. We see that gender interacts with class, caste, race, location of people to shape different kinds of experiences. For example, in my work in Delhi slums, we see that even where water pipes are available, only half of the households have access within their homes in informal settlements. So many rely on shared standpipes, but not everyone waits in the same queue in the same way. It's very interesting. Women from poorer and marginalized groups often spend longer hours negotiating access, facing social hierarchies, and carrying back water home. In Nairobi informal settlements in the Mathare slums, we observe that water collection is overwhelmingly women's responsibility, but it often takes more than 2 to 3 hours a day, which is a lot. But again, this burden is also uneven. Women in more precarious households depend on unreliable sources that are not, the quality is very poor and sometimes they're not potable. So even these women are exposed to harassment, conflicts, violence, and sextortion, very common in these slums in Eastern Africa. Again, in rural areas, particularly in rural Rajasthan in northwestern India, we see how technology reshapes inequality. So now in the present times, there are a lot of water tankers that has reduced the need to walk long distances for women. But again, access depends on the ability to pay. So wealthier households have benefited, where women are no longer walking long distances to fetch water, while poorer women, often from lower caste groups, continue to walk miles as traditional sources now have declined. In our recent work in ZEF, which we did in Nepal in last year, we found that when there is rural male out-migration in Nepal, many Dalit households are now leasing in land and doing agriculture, which was not there earlier. So Dalit women households are mostly now farming in mountainous areas of Nepal, and they are now new farmers in agricultural production. But this shift in responsibility is not matched by control over resources. Access to irrigation for these Dalit women farmers remain very unequal. In many cases, they are not only allowed to use water at odd hours, late night, or early in the morning, because irrigation systems are still controlled by dominant caste groups, and dominant caste groups, mostly men farmers. So even as women step into more productive roles, caste and power continue to shape when and how they will access water. So to summarize, I would say that in several contexts, one pattern is very clear, that women carry the responsibility of accessing water, but control over water is shaped by intersecting inequalities. That is why water access is not just about availability. I would say it is more about time, safety, control, and who has the power to get them or claim them. Here I would rest my point, and over to you, Annabelle.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks to all of you for sticking to the time as well. So we have time to delve into the second question, which, well, in the first one, we looked at the reality and tried to understand how water affects men and women differently in different settings. But now we don't want to stop there, because we want to know what can we do about it and which are successful approaches for inclusive water governance. Which approaches have you come across, which have been useful to tackle these problems? And I suggest that we go from the local to the more institutional and international level. So I would start with Hind and Anindita and then go over to Ivan and Abby. Hind, would you like to start, please?
Sorry, I was muted. Yes, Annabelle, yes. So I will also be focused on the Moroccan context and what, if I could say, lessons we can learn from our experience from working with women in the Oasis or the semi-arid region. So in this context, or the Moroccan rural context, I think that several concrete opportunities emerge for more inclusive water governance. So I will try to highlight a few key points. So the first one is that I think it's essential to integrate a gender perspective in water governance. But let me explain because it's not only about inclusion, but it's also about understanding how water is actually accessed and used. In waste system, for example, women are not just users of water. They are, as I've already said, directly involved in irrigation, agriculture work, livestock activities, and also in post-harvest processes. So, as well as in domestic uses, as I explained. So, a concrete opportunity, I think, is to better document these uses and at the local level and to take them into account in water allocation rules and planning. This also means that decision-making spaces such as the irrigation, but also the water users association should better reflect these rule in practices, not only in discourse. Because every time we are in field and we are asking if women are actually integrated in associations or in rural communities that are in charge of handling water or managing water, they said yes, they have the theoretically the opportunity of the ability to go there, but in reality it's far from this because there is a lot of other constraints that I will try to explain that stand behind or stand in front of the access of women or the effective access of women to this arena or to these spaces. So the second opportunity that I can explain is that to address access to resources because it's strongly linked to a better or to integrate gender in the water governance. So women often face constraints in accessing not only to water but also to land, the irrigation systems, and as I already said, the decision-making space. So concrete measures include also supporting access to resources and adapting institutional frameworks to allow more meaningful participation. And I think that the third opportunity is to support women-led local initiatives because in many rural areas, not only in Oasis but also in other parts or other rural societies in Morocco, women are already organizing around agricultural production and processing or transformation activities. However, these initiatives are often informal and not always recognized as they do not fit within the standardized frameworks and model promoted by public policies, particularly those who are designed as inclusion or empowerment programs for women. So I think that supporting these initiatives mean provide technical and financial support and recognizing their role in water management and local economies. And the fourth opportunity, I think, or the fourth point that we have to be aware of it is the role of social norms. Because social norms strongly shape access to water, participation, but also everyday practices. In many contexts, women participation is limited not only by formal barriers, for example, that the association is only made by men, but also by expectations about their roles, what the woman or the man should do or not do in the society, so donc and their place in public spaces. So I think that inclusion requires working not only at the institutional level but also engaging with social norms through adapted facilitation and mediation approaches. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And it's so important to look beyond the water sector to do something. We also explored this issue, by the way, together in a joint policy brief on the Moroccan Oasis, which you can find on the IDOS website. Over to you, Anindita Sekar. What did you come across in India or elsewhere? Which approaches to work well?
Yeah, so I would talk about few points that how some approaches could work well is that because we talk about inclusive water governance, it sounds a very big concept. But what I feel on the ground, it comes down to very practical choices. So what I see in my research is that the problem is really rarely just lack of water. It is more about how water is governed. For example, in urban Kenya, water insecurity is not simply about scarcity, it's more about fragmented institutions, weak regulation, and unequal distribution. So the first opportunity is to actually fix governance and not just build it around infrastructure of pipes and taps. The second insight is how much difference a small design choice can make. This is a very practical observation that I make. For example, in both in Nairobi and Delhi slums, we see that people in informal settlements rely on shared standpipes. So it creates queues, conflicts, violence, daily stress, and time burden for women. But when water is brought closer to the people through local systems, kiosks, reliable connections, those burdens can drop immediately. So proximity is not a minor detail, it can be really transformative. For example, a very simple example, we saw that there were very good water ATMs, working water ATMs, they were located in the valleys. So when it is, and women say that it's very hard to lug very heavy water uphill. So if those were located uphill, it would have been easier to carry the water downhill. So these are basic, very simple solutions that one could look at while fixing these problems as just technological. Third thing is that we often overlook that technology can also reinforce inequality. And if we are not careful, this is an example in Rajasthan that I give, that tankers have reduced walking distances, but it has only given access to people who could pay. So the real question is not just what technology we introduce, but who it works for. The other opportunity lies in building collective systems, which Hind also mentions, that in many earlier water systems, especially in arid regions of the world, including Western India, community-based managements and shared responsibilities were common. But those systems are on decline as commercialization of water is now become a reality. And it is now more individualized and maybe more unequal. So strengthening local institutions and water users group could actually restore equitable access. And finally, what I have learned across all these contexts is that water cannot be treated in isolation. It is linked to livelihood, agriculture, urban planning, and social policy. So governance approaches do not reflect that, then they would miss the people who are most affected or who we really need to cater to. So if I had to summarize, I would say that inclusive water governance is not about aiding a social layer to technical solution. It is about recognizing that water systems are already social and political, and we must be very careful designing them accordingly so it reaches everyone and do not remain unequal. That is what I would say.
Thank you, Anindita, for these very concrete suggestions rooted in field research on the ground, as I see. Now we're climbing up the ladder to take a little bit more macro institutional perspective with Ivan and Abby. Maybe Ivan, you would like to start?
Sure. I can start. I always prefer the part on solutions rather than the problems, right? So in the first part, I introduced this problem of sexual corruption. You can imagine how the effects, the psychological effects, the social effects that this has on the victims. I want to now shed some light on approaches we have tested that have worked. Going towards prevention of sexual corruption or support to its victims. So I'll start with the improvement of infrastructure. This directly reduces the vulnerabilities. There's studies shown that women with private pipe water connections or household toilets are significantly less exposed to sexual corruption. In practice, this means expanding household level water connections, installing safe, well-lit private sanitation facilities. Even in informal settlements, this means reducing the walking time or preventing or improving the lighting at night. With the aim to reduce the travel time and the exposure to unsafe or informal access points. And in addition, also strengthening community oversight of WASH projects. So infrastructure is one aspect. It's easier to say than done. Another one is legal protection. It means that in most of instances, sexual violence and corruptions are separate crimes, which is not just conceptually wrong, but it also leaves sexual corruption as a form of corruption in a gray area. And it also means that when the laws in a given country, they do not recognize this act, and victims, they struggle to seek justice. Or to find the right channels to seek support. So there are also instances we have seen where laws exist, but then the survivors, they don't have a good safety net, confidentiality, or that the grievance system is run by men, which of course is problematic. And so they're missing psychological or social support. There's also this stigma that portraying victims as complicit, and so this also prevents them to report. So, but there is a good example to share, and this comes from Kenya, where together with partners from WIN, we've managed to secure political champions, support in the government, and funding, which helped us to support the legal redrafting of the Sexual Offences Act. This was work done in 2024, then it was passed by the parliament, and it provides a legal backbone, right, to identify sexual corruption as a form of crime, and also to then, at least on paper, provide the mechanisms, the support to victims. So we're very excited now. The real work happens with enforcement. There's that. And finally, I want to also just wrap up with some thoughts on what if you don't have the legal backbone, right? There's still so much work you can do. So the example in Kenya has shown how important it is to have an in-country champion, somebody within the government who got it immediately, was willing to stick out her neck. So having a strong ownership on the ground is important, and also to involve as many, to have different angles to looking at the same problem. So communities, service providers, government, decision makers, and so on. Advocacy, awareness raising, it's a long game. It takes quite a lot of effort for people to accept that there is a problem. No, the first is denial, then it's okay, I understand now. It takes a lot of resources and time and the right narrative. And then finally, I would say understanding sexual corruption as not just a gender issue per se, but also as a corruption one. It's a continuous exercise, and it kind of reinforces, let's say, the whole preventative effort. I think for now, this is what I wanted to share, and then I'll take some questions if there's any afterwards. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ivan, and congratulations. I think that's a great achievement, and interesting to hear stories from the national level. Now we climb over to the international level with Abby. What are your success cases or lessons learned?
Thank you, Annabelle. And I think it's really, it was a good tactic to go from kind of community level back up. And I hope that those who are listening, that there's basically so much overlap into these examples and then what's being said. I just wanted to say a couple of things though before I go to my actual talking points, which is, I mean, what Anandita said around water systems are already social and political, like to me, and then Hind, you also spoke about social norms. Ivan, you've spoken about the intersection of, abuse and violence. And there's a whole body of work for colleagues online on preventing gender-based violence in WASH sector. Like it's a whole piece of work. And I think that just fundamentally, this is why at times, different sectors struggle with things, because at the end of the day, even when we're talking about something like water, it gets into the messiness of life, right? It gets into the messiness of these systems that are social and political, and how we really understand that, and that it can't just be looked at technically. So I just really wanted to drive that point home. I think what's most useful, and maybe for those listening, is I'm going to go through kind of these 7 key enablers that came out of a policy note that was prepared in 2025 by UNEP, DHI, the Global Water Partnership, and UN Women. And I just think as you've listened to the different case examples, just to try to, see how they all fit, because they do. And I think it's a good chapeau to end on. Because really what colleagues have already shared and what this note says is that we actually know what to do, and we know that progress can move when gender equality, and I would also add, as Hind mentioned, really, kind of intersectional inclusion, understanding where power is intersecting with class and caste and all these different things, how if this is built into political leadership, laws and policies, financing, participation, data, capacity, and coordination, we can actually move forward. So I don't think that we're implementing or we're not lacking guidance, but I do think that this needs to move out of case studies and into kind of macro systems change. So what are some things? What are the things that are in there? First, of course, it's around making gender equality and intersectional inclusion as a non-negotiable, and that has to be really structured into how water is governed, financed, how the solutions are being driven. And right now it's really an add-on. And if it isn't kind of in those mandates, budgets, accountability systems, then it just isn't going to happen, or the accountability to it is at risk. I think we all know this from all of our life. We have to move beyond commitments on paper, so that we do see that many countries, 71% of countries, do have policies in place where water plans have measures for women and girls. But we all know policies can sit on a shelf, and real enforcement and follow through is needed to actually change reality. Thirdly is around the budgeting and financing, and this is where at subnational, national, local, global levels, we always see things fall apart. There's commitments that are being reported on at national and global levels, but if it's not in the budgets, if it's not in the staffing, if it's not in the systems, even the design systems, how you do a community engagement, how do you bring in different intersectional voices into design, then it's not going to move forward in the way that could be most impactful. So that's where we have to be very honest about participation, and that, oftentimes women are in the room, or different, constituent groups are quote unquote represented, but it has to be really true inclusive engagement where there's actual power to vote or to shape decisions, to shape how systems are being built, to shape the accountability. And that's a fundamentally different thing than a tick box of somebody sitting in the room. And we just have to be very clear about that. And, I think somebody raised data already. I mean, we definitely see at the global level, there is data, of course, that is being collected, but even the current monitoring of SDG 6 still misses some of these gendered realities we've talked about. So time spent collecting water, the safety risks that are there, unpaid care work, unequal access or responsibilities within the household. So we have to get that more nuanced picture, I think, to also drive some of what was raised before around social norms. And then lastly, just to say, and colleagues have already said this, just that, we have to really invest in capacity and leadership. Women are still underrepresented across so many sectors, including the water sector, in technical and leadership roles. That's why it's really great to see, these, local experts and a good gender balance here, because at the end of the day, like we need to have representation matters, right? And of course, it's not only about gender. So I think, I do think that my takeaway from this panel, and thank you because I learned a lot, is that, and I'm sure that those online too, eager to hear your questions, I think we do really know what to do, but where we need to get to is that kind of that clear commitment and structural change. So this is obviously an excellent year to do that, given all the different milestones that we have coming up. So we really want to ensure that wherever water flows, gender equality flows with it. We need to look at what colleagues have said, look at these enablers, and look holistically at these contexts and see how this is really hardwired in. at the very local level up to the global level. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abby. Yeah, I can see many parallels between the local and then the national and the international level, and starting with intersectionality. Dear audience, it's your time for your questions. So if you have any, and was always wondering about some certain aspect about the women or men and water, don't hesitate to ask our experts here. Just opening.
There is one, sorry.
Yeah, maybe you can just
read
read it out because you have an overview on.
Yeah, I think so far there's been one comment, so I encourage meanwhile while others type in their questions or comments. I think there's one insight from Senegal, from Paul Ndiaga, from IPAR think tank, who says, thanks for this important webinar. We conducted a study on women's empowerment. The results showed that the more women have access to irrigation through solar energy, the more empowered they are. And I think there is also a link that is shared for the study. So any comments on that?
Thank you.
The
So
policy brief is in French, yeah, if someone wants it.
while others are still thinking about their questions, I would have one. In the field, we've often come across about the fact that men are leaving the rural areas in search for work elsewhere, which leaves women alone in the villages, not only with their usual daily tasks, but also taking care of the kids and the elderly people staying there, which increases the burden in the water sector and elsewhere, but is somehow also a chance because they take over many activities which they couldn't before. So I would be so curious to hear your view and your experiences on this. I think, Anindita, you also came across this in India. Maybe you could share your impressions on this.
Yeah, actually, this I would say an opportunity, and I see transformation happening in our recent work in Nepal, and Nepal is on the what should I say, on the map of the world where studies are really being conducted, because village after village we visited, there were no young men. There were only young boys, elderly men, and women. So actually it is now quite evident, and it's so pronounced that women are doing everything. So in our ethnographic study, we see this is a thing that women have to call their husbands and take permission as to what to do. And this has been a pattern. But interestingly, there were households where there were women of the second and third generation who have experienced migration. And these young women now say that we do our way. Because, for example, if I sit and wait for my husband to tell me what I have to do, then I will miss the opportunity to harvest and rain will happen, or I will not be able to fix the irrigation schedule. So I see these young women are taking charge, and in fact, the elderly men are also supporting them in doing so, because now it is no luxury. They have to survive, they have to earn, they have to take care of their land, or they would leave land fallow. And which is true. In Nepal, fallow land is a big problem because there's no young men who are going to do cultivation. So with time, if this kind of transformation happen, women will be really transforming this. But the only caveat I would like to mention is that still today, in many parts of the world, land ownership is still very gendered. So this was a major problem. They would say that at the end of the day, I do not own this parcel of land. So when it will come to the major decision of leasing in, leasing out, selling, buying in, it will be the men. So, I saw that conflict, that why should we, negotiate and get water, do a good farming, but at the end of the day, we do not own it. So these are, again, a macro level policy decision and sometimes very cultural biases. that will hinder these kind of transformation. But yes, I see that younger women are coming up, and they also have some support from their families.
Yes, thank you, Anindita. Anyone else on other countries where you've come across this? Yes, Abby, please.
I mean, maybe just to say, I think this is such an important, important like development trend. I don't know, but the kind of urbanization that's happening in so many places, where the economic opportunities are driving people to city centers, and then what's happening in the city center itself around, and going back to these issues around the real risk and potential for exploitation and abuse around access to water overall, but then what Anindita is sharing around, okay, what does this mean then for labor writ large, in rural communities? And I do think that, I mean, this is not like a firm UN Women data point, colleagues, but you do see this trend, right? Wherever I'm at, in many places, in my own country, in many other countries, you really see that. The other thing I wanted to just highlight, but please put this aside if the participants have questions, is technology. I mean, this got raised by the different panelists, but I mean, we are really looking at the potential of technology and the huge risks, including for gender-based violence. And I'd be curious to see like how colleagues are seeing, the opportunities for technology, but also the risk, because this seems like very big in every sector. Over.
Okay, Annabelle, I'm taking if there are like a couple of questions, which if there are no responses on your question, I would like to bring this in. I think there are two questions with regards to what Ivan just mentioned in addition to the work spoken about WIN. I'm interested in hearing what the various presenters have seen in terms of sexual corruption in different contexts, and particularly in refugee areas, and how prevalent does it seem to be? Yeah, I mean, if someone has come across it. And similar to that, Fazal asks Ivan if the gender-based exploitation that has been presented has been addressed or discussed among decision makers of the region, and that you spoke about in Tanzania, and what they think about any possible solution, as ultimately sooner or later one of their family members is a victim, I don't know, sex for water, etc. So that's a question on that topic, and then maybe I'll come with the second one later, once if maybe some of the panelists want to respond to that.
Yeah, maybe I take so there was one question for the other presenters, which I'm also interested to hear the responses. I'll respond to the one in the chat though. For when, so in the past years, we had to build a critical mass of data, which was challenging on its own, because it's a matter of how you ask certain questions, how to interpret the answers, and so on and so forth. And we haven't worked in Tanzania yet, and I'll also respond to the other one simultaneously. In refugee camps, we also haven't looked. There are all sorts of horrible things happening in refugee camps, so the assumption is that the rate would be quite high, but we haven't looked into that. Similarly for Tanzania, we haven't engaged, not because of lack of interest. It's merely a question of priorities and building on work where we have already started. Yeah, just wanted to add maybe that we in the coming 2 years, we've just secured some funding to expand our work in Uganda, Bangladesh, and Kenya around sexual corruption. And one part of it is also now to bring a little bit of lesson learning towards other countries in other contexts. So for sure, we can also include the colleagues from Tanzania in some of our considerations going forward. Over.
Thank you. Anyone else on that topic, or otherwise, maybe Srini, you continue with the next question?
Yeah, sure. Marvin Lampe asks, as a lot of work women do in labor centered around water tends to be overlooked and is invisible to state planners because it happens in the domestic or informal sphere. How can governance frameworks make it legible, and acknowledging their labor without the risk of co-opting it?
Are you calling on someone, Annabelle, or how do you want us to?
Please go ahead.
Do we self-opt in? I mean, I think it's a really, really great point, because there's so much that's invisibilized around labor and women's labor, and that can be, with the care economy and labor that's linked very much, directly to this. So I think that UN Women's actually done quite a bit of work, and I can drop in some policy guidance here for states around recognizing and naming and legitimizing and valuing that kind of care economy that is foundational, and that really translates into this whole body of work around unpaid care. So I just wanted to, mostly just reinforce and highlight that what you've said, that it is overlooked and that it is invisible, is real, and that there's actually work that's being done, at national level, and of course is coming down as well into communities and smaller governance structures, but that it's also become a very important issue at a global level, and at the UN level as well, in the multilateral spaces around the whole care economy. So I'll drop some points in there. That was more of a kind of a macro point, but I'm sure different colleagues might have suggestions for how that is visibilized in actual policies or procedures that are being developed, either at local or state or national level over.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Yeah, but just to add another point to the point that was already said by Abby, is that I think it's a very important question because it touches a central tension. Why? It's how to make women's work visible, not only in activities which are linked to water, but also in the whole activities that are made by women, without turning it actually into something that is controlled or appropriated by formal governance frameworks. Based on my research in rural Morocco, I think it's a large part of women's work related to water takes place in what we considered as the domestic or informal sphere. That's why we tend to remain invisible to planners. For example, if even when we produce numbers, statistics about the work in rural areas, we tend to ignore or to make invisible the quantity or the part of work which is made by women, because it's not considered as being part of the productive sphere where we can earn or we can produce money. So I think that's one way to address this. It's to start by making these practices visible through, for example, documentation or mapping these activities through, for example, events, through publishing policy briefs and so on, like the one we tried to publish last year at the local level, but also at the commune or the regional level. And in that way, I think that we can start to change the mind, or to make people more aware about this invisible part of the activities which are held by women.
Yes, thank you, Hind. And we often come across the local champions in this sense, which are also very important role models, I think.
Yeah.
Very interesting to see. Srini, do you have any other questions from the chat, or?
Not a question, but an answer from Barbara Schreider from Wind. I think to the question that Fazil asked earlier, whether it has been discussed by decision makers. I think Barbara presents insights from 3 different countries that I've been working with. In Kenya, Wind Partners, KBOSnet, and you have been leading the work on sexual corruption with great success. It is now being translated into legislation, not just not just the water sector, but also across all sectors, criminalizing sexual corruption. This puts Kenya at the leading edge in this regard in Africa. In Uganda, we have had some conversations with decision makers, and they're very open into engaging on the issue and seeing how to address it and take it forward. In Bangladesh, it has been much more difficult. There has been very little, if any, research on sexual corruption in any sectors, and the conversation is really in its very, very early days. So there is a lot of work to be done to get the issue onto the agenda. So there are some links that are being posted by the panelists. I think someone needs to repost them to all, because I don't think they're reaching everyone yet.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm really glad that we talk concretely about problems and solutions, and I see a lot of enthusiasm because we actually know what is going wrong and what could eventually work to address these issues. But Abby, you've also been very positive about current policy options, which made me wonder a bit about how we are all affected by not only funding cuts, but also supposed wokeness of gender topics. So it's kind of a contradictory movements. I mean, we finally understand better what the problems are and what the solutions could be, and then on the other side, these major shifts. So how do you deal with this in your work, especially Abigail, but of course also all others?
Sorry, I was looking for the audio button. Yes, I do think it is quite a contradiction. And of course, we have seen, especially at the global level, very strong support across nation states around the kind of recommitment to the 1995 platform for gender equality and the Beijing commitments. Those were recently reaffirmed, including addressing and preventing issues like gender-based violence. And as I've said, and we've dropped some links in, there's also a lot more work now on visibilizing the gendered work that takes place at home. We can see how that's linked to this topic. And yet we know that at a national level, gender responsive budgeting is not there. Even just to take the nation states themselves, how they look at the cost savings of gender responsive budgeting, because there is quite a bit of data on that, but yet that's still not getting translated from ministries of finance across a whole of government approach in nations around the world. And we do see some good examples. I know even in my more recent time in Fiji, there was great cooperation across the ministries to have their first gender responsive budget, and looking at the investments that can be put in at the national level and how those yield better social, cohesion and productivity across the board. At a kind of global level, if you're looking at overseas development assistance, that more traditional sense of ODA, certainly we've always seen gender equality and issues like gender-based violence have been less than 1%, of any overall ODA budget. It's always been at the very bottom, which is why the mainstreaming of gender is also very important across water, sanitation, health, education. But now where we are in this current moment is even more of an acute crisis, because that number overall is dropping. That's for government, but also we're seeing a huge backlash and pullback of funding as well from women's rights organizations. And frankly, let's be honest, if we're talking about community levels and developing systems and who we're engaging and who is doing this work and who is advocating, it does not happen without women-led organizations driving this at community level. And so when you see not just the pullback of funding, but the actual eradication, the collapse of institutions or women's rights organizations that is happening right now, it's of great concern. And this is obviously something that we're doing a lot of advocacy around. But the reality is that military expenditures are skyrocketing, and funding into these critical issues is is what's at stake. So the political momentum is important. The champions of this are important. The political leaders who are speaking up. But I would say most importantly as well is all of us recognizing the role of women leaders and women's rights organizations and ministries of women who are often under-resourced at national level, and across the board, the importance of this and really bringing that perspective and bringing their voices into these kinds of platforms. Thank you.
Thank you, Abby. Yeah, also so for shedding light on the different levels where we have to tackle this. Anyone else wanting to share their take on this, or how it affects you, funding cuts or changing mainstream attitudes of some? Otherwise, maybe Anindita, you just replied to a question in the chat, I think. Maybe you can read it out.
Yeah, actually, I was just replying on that question about how women's work needs to be recognized. I feel it's not about recognition anymore. It's about distribution of this role. There are two aspects of it. Most of the time, what I have observed, we argue, we research on women fetching water. But I suppose now it's time to shift the paradigm and understand why men don't fetch water. Because there are instances where men are fetching water, when water is commercialized during disasters. And when the technology is very sophisticated. I see in my research in water ATMs, because from the water ATMs in Delhi, you have to buy the water with an electronic card that has to be recharged by mobile phones, and women in informal settlements either did not have mobile phones that they owned, or they did not know how to use digital money. So men were fetching water. So and in Rajasthan, for example, we have examples when you have to buy water and women do not have cash, and because of the veil system, they do not come in front of men who are not from their family. Men are fetching water. So there are instances where men are fetching water, and social theories have proved this. After globalization, gendered roles have shifted. And there are a lot of evidence for different kinds of role. So I feel now it's time to talk about, there are two things. One, provide technology, provide infrastructure, provide finance and governance. And at the same time, till that is happening, and well, with funding cuts, a lot of things are slipping back, we see. So there is a larger question. If it is a domestic task, it's a household responsibility. When will men fetch water? Is also a question now to be understood and studied.
Thank you, Anindita, for looking at this perspective as well. So I think it's time for a final round. Maybe each of you could say what would be the best achievement in 5 years from here. One topic that is close to your heart, that is achievable even under current constraints. I did not prepare you to this, but maybe you have some spontaneous ideas that would be great to share. Whoever wants to go first.
I can start.
Yes.
I can start. All right. So let me think. Maybe I do it specifically for the countries where we work. So for Kenya, the objective here would be to go from the legislation to the enforcement. Okay. So to have really a system that protects that prevents, first of all, extortion from happening. That you have more and more service providers that are aware of the problem, but they're also equipped with preventative measures. So that would be for Kenya. For Uganda, I think we are aiming to get some championships within the government, somebody who can really vouch and bring forward the work, reflecting the good experience from Kenya. Whereas Bangladesh still remains, let's say, out of the three, the hardest nut to crack. Simply because just, talking about corruption, let alone sexual corruption, it's still a taboo word. So in that sense, the wish list here would be to have an awareness, and a joint understanding among different stakeholders of not just what sextortion is, but what then does in practice, right? The repercussions on the population, on the women, on the gender balance, on the family relationships or the community relationships. Let's start with that, and then we can work about definitions and or legislation. Thanks.
Thank you, Ivan. Very concrete. Who wants to go next on the wish list? Anindita? You're still muted.
Yeah. So in the current context, I think the focus has to be on what can be done immediately, or to rephrase, what is doable. That means improving reliability and bringing water closer to households. Even small changes can significantly reduce women's time and risk. And there is a lot of risk. I think I forgot to talk about domestic violence. Women have been collecting water in odd time. And there is not only sextortion, the domestic violence has also increased when they go out in odd hours to collect water. And when it takes more time than anticipated by their partners who are waiting at home. So this is very sad thing that I have experienced in my fieldwork when women tell their stories. So this will really matter. At the same time, strengthening local governance is key, especially ensuring that women from marginalized groups are actually part of decision making. This is completely not happening on the ground. And finally, it is less about new policies and more about implementation and making sure that whatever is there, the existing system work better for those who are currently excluded. So there are taps and pipes, there's no water. Even if there is water, it is coming only twice per week. So that could be done. So the realistic goal is to reduce the most visible inequalities now, while gradually shifting power over time, which I talked about when men will fetch water. That's a gradual transformation, of course. But these are the immediate need because water is an immediate concern. You cannot do without it.
Yes, thank you so much, Anindita. Abby, how about your dreams? Achievable ones, please.
Yeah, no, I think I'm a really practical person, and I think building off of what Anindita has said, I mean, for me, it's really that right now, women and girls' voices, and especially those, facing intersectional barriers, Indigenous women around the world are actively included right now in the designs and in the challenges around water distribution, because I believe that will have an immediate impact on lives. And that becomes institutionalized. And I think the other point to make, having myself witnessed and dedicated my professional life to ending gender-based violence, sexual assault, rape, domestic violence, and seeing how intricately linked issues around water, health, sanitation are around the world, I also have a very simple wish that there are quality services for those survivors also present. Because when you have a disclosure, which you always do, when it links to, it took me 4 more hours to go however long to get the water, and then the domestic violence starts. Part of the issue also is that those other community services aren't there. So it's a whole fabric that needs to be there. And all of that is really under-resourced. So that would be my simple wish and practical hope, is that in 5 years' time, we're not having a conversation about meaningful inclusion. Thank you.
Thank you. Hint, please.
Yes, so I think so many things have already been said. So I think in the current context that I would like to see water governance that really takes into account how water is actually used on the ground, by whom, and under which conditions. And I wish that the rules of women are not only recognized but also better understood and reconsidered in practice without trying to fit everything into a rigid framework. And more broadly, I would like to have or to see more space given to local initiatives and local realities in shaping water policies at a national or international levels.
Thank you so much. That was a really rich exchange of experiences. I thank all the panelists, the public as well, for the active participation, and our communications team, dear Alma. Thank you, all those working in the background, making this possible. I think we're all reachable by email. You find the links to our website in the invitation if you have any further questions. And you can also get in touch with us if you want to be informed about future events. Thank you so much. Have a nice evening.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thanks for the
Bye-bye.
moderation, Annabelle.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you
Bye-bye.
very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Have a nice
Thank you.
evening.
Bye.